Welcome to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SEVA WV and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. In today's first segment, we welcome veteran legislator Senator Mike Caputo of Marion County. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I always look forward to talking to the folks that's going to get the message back home to the area I represent. So.
Absolutely. Also with us is West Virginia News Governmental Affairs reporter Charles Young. Let's get things started. Mike, you've been down there for almost 30 years, first in the House, now in the Senate. You were there as part of a large Democratic majority, now a very small Democratic minority. This session's you've been the lone nay vote on a handful of bills. Do you get frustrated or discouraged when you find yourself alone on one side of the debate?
Well, it's hard sometimes when you feel like you're on an island and you don't have much support around you. But you know what? I come down here with my convictions, and I was taught a long time ago, the only thing you bring with you is your integrity, and that's all you can ever hope to leave with. So, the people know me. They've elected me 13 straight times. I haven't changed from 1996 until now, and I don't plan on changing. So I figure if the people back home didn't like my stance on things, they would have threw me out a long time ago. So I think they support me and for what I have fought for, and I'm going to continue to do that. If I'm the only person, then so be it. I mean, with that being said, I don't want to be an obstructionist and, be perceived as that, but I am going to voice my concerns when something, really troubles me, or I think the people back home would want me to, and vote accordingly.
Sure. Well, and Senator, I wanted to ask along those lines specifically about your opposition to the tax plan just passed the other day. Like John mentioned, you were the one nay vote on that. Tell us a little bit about, what your issues with that bill were.
Well, that's not entirely true, Charles. I voted no on the rule suspension because I wanted the bill to have the 3-day reading and proper vetting and have time to hear from my constituents back home. But I did vote for the plan because I believe that people, and I don't know if this is the best plan, I really don't, but I've always heard from people they want relief on their taxes, particularly on their vehicles, and they want relief on their state income tax. So, I kind of felt like that's what the people want me to do. That's what I'm going to do. What I've thought maybe we could have used that money in different avenues of West Virginia, but I'm not on the finance committee and I don't have a say in that kind of stuff, so I can only vote for what's in front of me, particularly on issues like that, and I felt like this was the best I could do to try to help give some relief to the folks back home, and I hope and pray it works out. So.
Sure. Okay. Well, and then I know we wanted to delve into, some of these labor issue related bills we were talking about before we started recording. If we could start with the PEIA bill. You were talking a little bit about that before we got started. Tell us your thoughts on this latest attempt at fixing PEIA.
Yeah, there was only about 4 of us, I think, that voted against that, and a couple Republicans and a couple Democrats. I think it's a Band-Aid approach. I think it dumps all the burden onto the plan participants. I don't think we've done enough to try to see if we could find a balance there. We got a huge surplus now. Maybe we should have devoted more of a revenue stream to that and keep the plan down. I don't like giving a pay raise to cover the cost of a benefit that state employees have. And there's 31,000 people in this plan that are non-state employees, municipal workers and county workers and things like that. It's not guaranteed that pay raise will even go to them. So, what's going to happen there? I'm deeply concerned about that. And the $2,300 pay raise is not guaranteed to all state workers. It has to be allocated through separate agencies other than teachers and state police and corrections officers, things like that. They're not in the statute. Their pay is not set in the statute. So you got to count and hope and pray that the agencies do the right thing and we allocate enough money to do that, which has been a problem in the past. So, I got real concerned, but it's like, all right, I'm going to give you $1. But I'm going to charge you 90 cents for working here. And I've always been of the position that, our state employees have given so much for so little pay. And they did that for a reason. They believed that they always had good benefits, they had a good retirement, and they had longevity, and they never had to worry about getting laid off. So they hung with those lower paying jobs and provided services to our state in exchange for that. And now we reduce that and take that away from them. I think they should have been a higher priority for this legislative body. I think that one thing I've learned in 27 years, if you have the political will to do something, you will find a way to do it. And I just think we just didn't dig deep enough because, Governor Justice, to his credit, and I like Governor Justice, we're from different parties, but I like him. He always said he will never raise PEIA under his watch. And now it looks like he's backpedaling a little bit on that, and I don't know the reasons why. But I just wish they would have got more involved. We could have maybe crafted a better bill and something that was, something we all just really had time to look at and see if it was the right thing. I think it was the process was rushed, and I think it's something too important to cram through. I think it should have really been looked at hard.
Well, and you just referred to this as a Band-Aid measure, so obviously we're going to have to, circle back around during a special session or next year's regular session and, do something more comprehensive, don't you think?
Or we can do what we usually do and kick the proverbial can down the road and let somebody else worry about it down, when our governor moves on to whatever he does and leadership moves on to different things or what have you. So, but yeah, someone is going to have to deal with this. I would have preferred we just dealt with it in a more strategic manner and been able to bring experts in and see if there was, and maybe there isn't another solution. I'm not an insurance guy. I can't speak as an expert, but I am a people guy and a worker guy, and to place this burden more and more on the workers, it just gets harder and harder. But hey, I tell people all the time, elections have consequences, and you have a super duper majority of Republicans down here, most of which are I consider my friends, but they're going to do things a little differently than I'd like to see them done. So, but the people send them down here, so we got to live with the consequences.
Okay. Well, and speaking of workers, a couple of the other bills you'd mentioned before we got started here was one relating to reduction of unemployment benefits. Tell us a little bit about your concerns there.
Yeah, I'm deeply concerned about that. Right now in West Virginia, if you get laid off from a job and you don't get called back, you can collect up to 26 weeks of unemployment. I mean, that's not a whole hell of a lot, quite frankly. When you get in an industry like the mining industry, who maybe takes a big dip and downturn. I know people that was laid off for years, but it gives them ample time to try to find comparable work, and they don't rush to move to the Carolinas, which I'm deeply concerned about. So that bill is in the House of Delegates. I hope those folks in the House of Delegates have the wisdom to just put a knife through that bill and kill it. I think it's a bad piece of legislation. It reduces the number from 26 weeks to 12, and there's a matrix there that, depending on the level of unemployment, you could go up to 20 weeks. It could be a low of 12 and a high of 20. And the arguments really blow my mind when they say, well, people don't want to work and this is just like a handout. Well, look, it is not a handout because it's not permanent. I mean, if you don't want to work, let's say you are that extremist, you're going to get this benefit for 26 weeks and you're not going to get it anymore. There's no extensions. There's no way that you can get any more out of unemployment than your rate of what you paid and the maximum weekly benefit, period. That's it. So to say that people just use this to lay home and not go to work, it's an insult. It's an absolute insult to workers, the hard workers of West Virginia, because I have been laid off, and in my speech I talked about, there's my friend Andy Nisley. Hi, Andy. I talked about, carrying a dinner bucket for a living. And I looked around the Senate and I said, look, most of you, all my friends are very successful businessmen and women, and I applaud you for that. But you don't know what it feels like to go to the mine one day with your dinner bucket in hand, and then Human Resources comes out with a layoff list, says, hey, I'm sorry, we're cutting back 100 employees. And you got 2 kids at home, you got a house payment, you got a couple car payments. It's a struggle. And I mean, it's such a devastating blow to you, especially if you're the breadwinner of the family, of how you're going to keep that going. So unemployment gives you a little bit of hope, a little bit of faith, keeps you going until you can figure out your life. And you know what? If we attack that segment of our society, what have we become? I just don't get it. And it's not like we can't afford it. We spend money on all kind of things, and we're trying to bring good jobs into West Virginia with Nucor and Forum, and got some other things going in. That's great. And if these jobs come, we won't ever have to worry about that unemployment benefit. Mm-hmm. But it should be there. It should absolutely be there if you need it.
This seems like another bill that is a reaction to the pandemic and people's kind of holdover of grievances about policies that were enacted during the pandemic. We're not actually necessarily legislating a problem. We're, doubling back around to put something on the bill because of how we feel about what happened during that time.
Yeah, and is that the right thing to do? Is that the way we should react? I mean, this pandemic, there was no playbook. We did a lot of things right. We made a few mistakes along the way, and I'm talking about those in charge, President Biden, Governor Justice. We did a lot of things right, and we learned as we went. We just learned as we went. We had to adjust, and it was a very fluid situation. And I applaud the governor. I think he did a tremendous job leading us through this pandemic. I applaud President Biden. I think he did a tremendous job leading us. That's not going to be very popular in West Virginia, me saying I applaud President Biden, but I just call it for what it is, and we've learned a lot. But, were mistakes made? Of course they were. But I don't think we throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. Unemployment has just been under attack by this legislative leadership team, in my opinion, for no apparent reason other than it's just another anti-worker bill to check the box for them and their corporate donors.
Mm-hmm. Well, and something else that you had mentioned that could impact workers was this public employee grievance bill that we were talking about before we got started. Could you give us a little bit of the background on that? I know that's not as large an issue.
Yeah, I mean, it affects you. It don't affect a lot of people because, quite frankly, you may know 100 state workers and probably none of them maybe ever filed a grievance. Maybe some do. But obviously the ones that do feel they have been grieved by the state, and they should have a right to a fair hearing. And it should be a right that they can do themselves, whether they belong to one of the organizations like the AFT or WVA, or they don't. They should be able to navigate through the process. It's made the process much more cumbersome. And even at the end, and I'm just being as brief as I can because I'm just touching on a couple points here, there is a provision now that if it passes muster in the House of Delegates, that you could be responsible for all the costs associated with that grievance if you lose. Now, if you work on the highways, DOH, and you're just a laborer, say, and you're making $15-20 an hour, and you feel grieved, and you start looking at this, and you say, man, I don't belong to any organization, and I'm going to, if I do this, and and I go all the way, and I'm unsuccessful, and could be responsible for the costs, and you start adding up lawyer fees in your head, and I don't know what it would be. Could it be $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, whatever it could be? It's going to just scare you so bad that you're just going to say, nah, I'm not going to do it. Even when you feel you were wronged, you're going to be afraid to speak up because it could have financial implications on you. So I just got troubles with that. I just don't know why we want to do that. And it's not like there is a million grievances a year in West Virginia, So it's another box for them to check, I guess, so to speak. So. Okay.
Well, the last thing I wanted to ask you about, Senator, and you kind of alluded to this with our super duper majority and essentially our one party rule in Charleston right now, as we're, as the 2024 season approaches, what do you think Democrats need to do to turn the tide? I know we often talk about, coalition building in terms of generations of it taking that long. What do we need to do to start that process?
Well, I think the only thing we can do, because we don't have the money that they have, and we're not going to have the corporate donations that they have. Citizens United was a big game changer in money and politics, and the only way I think you will be successful in getting politics back where they should be is take the money out of it, and I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But we as Democrats need to continue our grassroots effort and talk about bread and butter issues. We need to talk about what's important to you at the dinner table, and we don't need to talk about Wall Street. We need to talk about Main Street. And those kind of issues, at the end of the day, if people listen, will hopefully put some more Democrats back down here and just create somewhat of a balance. We just don't have a balance now. We have no input. It's like we can't even reach compromise anymore because they're compromising within their own caucus, and they're not compromising with 3 members out of 34 or 12 members out of 100 in the House of Delegates. I mean, they really have no reason to talk to us because they have the votes to do whatever they want to do. And I would like to see more of a balance. I know when we first lost the majority, we had, I think, 46 Democrats in the House of Delegates, or 43, something like that. And there was really good conversations. Now, did we get everything? No. And we got some things that we really didn't want, like right to work, that was near and dear to me. But we at least was part of the conversation. Now we just don't seem to be part of the conversation. I don't mean any disrespect to any of my colleagues. I've been here a long time and I respect them all. And then, you've had some Democrats who cut and run and switch parties. And, I just think that's being dishonest with the voters. But that's a whole nother issue. But yeah, back to grassroots issues and talk about bread and butter stuff and hopefully the voters back home. It's up to them. It's their house, and it's up to them. We'll see that we do need a balance down here and elect some more Democrats.
Excellent insight there from Mike Caputo. He is a senior legislator representing now in the Senate from Marion County. Mike, thanks for joining us. Anything you want to add to wrap up?
No, it's my pleasure. Again, I want to thank you guys for allowing me to come on and have a few minutes of your time, and maybe the folks back home. And, of course, I'm pretty accessible. If anybody got any questions or any concerns, please, I look forward to you reaching out to me.
Mike Caputo, Senator from Marion County, thank you for joining us. And this is Legislature This Week. We'll be right back.
Your heart is in the best hands. Mont Health Heart and Vascular is the highest ranked cardiovascular program in the state of West Virginia by the American College of Cardiology. Choose Mont Health. Feel the difference.
Welcome to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SEVA WV and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. In this segment, we're pleased and honored to welcome Senator Eric Tarr. He is the chair of the Finance Committee in the Senate and a key architect of the tax plan. Senator Tarr, thanks for joining us.
Oh, happy to be here, John. Thanks for having me.
Also with us is West Virginia News Governmental Affairs reporter Charles Young. Charles, you've got some questions for the senator.
Sure. Yeah. So obviously, the big news from over the weekend was the tax plan that you guys unveiled and we passed. So when we had President Blair on the show a couple weeks ago, he talked about how the initial Senate plan was generally crafted by, taking a look at the state's finances and working backwards to see what we could afford. So could you talk a little bit about how we got from the 15% reduction in the original plan to the 21.25 in this latest version?
Yes, certainly. So there's a lot of discussion between the House and the Senate on what is available for a tax cut. And since Governor Justice had came into office in 2016 and having his first session, I think it was in 17, we've not had what's called a 6-year plan. And typically what would happen with governors before Governor Justice is a 6-year estimate of our revenues and expenditures would be before us. And so as we're starting to look at a tax cut, we needed to know what our obligations were that were already codified in state law looking ahead for the next several years in order to figure out what we have relative to our estimated revenue growth. And to do that, since we didn't have a revenue estimate from the governor's office, we started having some pretty lengthy and intense budget hearings within Senate Finance, which budget hearings we do every year. But for the Senate, we weren't really ready to go in and discuss the absolute details of where we would end up being. We had an approximation of where we thought we would end up, which was we thought we had about $600 million available for a tax cut because of holding 4 years of flat budgets. And that produces $150 million per year of growth that when you hold your expenditures flat, as that grows up, then it puts a difference between your expenditures and your revenues of about $600 million. That's what a 4-year flat budget does. So we knew that by doing that, we would have at least $600 million. And then we went into our hearings and took all the agencies to the budget hearings to figure out what obligations that we have looking forward out to 2028 is what we looked at. So we actually did it for 5 years. It was hard for us from just the Finance Committee to see what 6 years looked like. But in doing that, we started looking at the items that came up to us, and then we had to go back and investigate how much accuracy there was in the reporting from the agencies to the Finance Committee. And so that started producing some variance of where we thought we had some room to go in and work with the tax cut. So I do feel comfortable that in that $750 to $760 million range now, having gone through all that, I think that what we're doing is safe and sustainable and will have economic impact for the people of West Virginia.
Okay, great. Well, and like I said, this came out over the weekend. It came out of the committee and was passed in the Senate the same day. There was some criticism of, the lack of transparency here, but it sounds like this is, the result of compromise that largely happened behind closed doors. Talk a little bit about that and that criticism. Do you think there was enough openness in this process?
Yeah, I do. I think because, it's one is that in the process, I've never been hesitant to be on shows like this throughout this process, through even the past several years, because for several years, the legislature has been trying to figure out how do we do a tax reform for West Virginia, which would result in tax reductions for West Virginia citizens. And so, there's even, we've had bills come up before that would reduce the income tax by 50%, but it would do that by swapping in consumption tax, by increasing the sales tax, and that wouldn't fly. It couldn't get through the legislature. So this time, we've had these discussions year in and year out, and year in and year out for a while. So there's been a lot of bedrock kind of to stand on for getting to the bill that we have before us now. And so in this process, it came down to, I think, that both the House and the Senate agreed that we should have a tax cut for the people of West Virginia. So that's one thing. We got a place to start from. So the next thing is okay, well then how much can we do it? And that's where the disagreement really settled in. And so what happened is the governor came out and introduced a 50% reduction to the personal income tax cut. And so was going to be somewhere between a $1.25 and a $1.3 billion reduction in revenue for the state. And as he came out with that, the House was pretty much on board with that and was in lockstep with him. So they introduced it on day one, put it in Finance Committee day two, and then between then and having one budget hearing, passed out a $1.3 billion reduction in our revenue. In the Senate, we wanted to take a little more time and try to figure out exactly what expenses lay before us. And so as we started looking at those expenses, we were in communication with the House frequently. So going through and saying week by week we would go in. The governor was there in those conversations as well to have discussions about that vetting process we were going through and what we were finding. So the Senate's position hasn't changed relative to what it was last year, is that we really needed to address a lot of the way we tax personal property. And part of the reason we wanted to do that is that West Virginia is the worst in the nation on how we tax personal property. The absolute worst place to go if you're going to move your capital investment to a state on how we tax personal property. And that's, we kind of tried to do that through an amendment process just to give a pathway to eliminate those taxes going forward. That failed, as everybody knows. So the next step is, okay, well, it's still a problem. So if we can't address it that way, then how do we address it? And so it became a compromise between the House's position of doing it all with income tax just as a bracket cut, as opposed to going in and also addressing that personal property taxation side of it. And so the whole bill addresses income tax, because even though it's a 21.25% reduction in the personal income tax, it's also several tax credits that are applied. 100% on your vehicles, 50% on equipment and inventory, and then 100% on a veteran who's 90% or more disabled on their real property tax. So when you apply that, those are all credits against the income tax. And if you have more credits than you owe an income tax, then you get a check back. So so we were able to marry those two. It all addresses income tax, which is something that the House and the governor's going to like. It has a mechanism by which we can go in and address our personal property taxation problems that we have. It doesn't fix them by any means, but it certainly improves our situation. So it was a good marriage between the two. So those discussions have been they're wide open for years now. So to say that there's not transparency to me is I think a mischaracterization of what happened.
Senator, we appreciate you explaining that to us. I do have some questions in regards, because clearly the bill, you said that, it's all income tax in one way or the other. So business owners are getting a little bit better deal than, say, normal workers who work for a business or work for state government, as the case may be. So the one thing that I've looked at is this trigger mechanism. The governor came in and the House supported 50% over 3 years. Let's draw people here, okay? And as I've said in past shows, this current bill and what's going to pass is the 21% cut isn't nearly as sexy as saying we're cutting 50% of your income tax with the plan to cut it all. You have 10% triggers set in here, but only up to 10% each year. So to get to 100%, as Steve Moore liked to say, go big or go home, and I know he doesn't have to balance the state budget, but at the same time, it's going to take 8 to 10 years to eventually eliminate the income tax the way it's currently structured. Am I reading that correct?
Yeah, every time you knock off 10% on the income tax, it's about $278 million. So if you go in and you look at, we have a $4.88 billion budget before us with the governor now. And we have significant surpluses, as everyone knows. So those surpluses are very heavily dependent, especially on our gas severance. And then the other part of that is the $600 million that came from flat budgets. And so the growth that we will have coming forward, we do anticipate. There's a lot of jobs coming to West Virginia, as everybody knows. A lot of announcements day by day. The problem is how soon those jobs have the economic impact as they land. It takes a while for those to actually produce the revenue coming into the state that affords the tax cut that you're mentioning. So what we did is we based that on that economic growth. And so the triggers that are there are heavily based on the revenues that are produced from economic growth. As those grow, then we swap it out with that income tax. So I think it's a way to get there responsibly. Go big or go home. I want to address that. And honestly, I think we did go really big here. It stretches the limit of my comfort, frankly, at $760 million, knowing that we have nearly $1 billion of obligated budget growth over the next 5 years that's already in law that we aren't spending today. So in other words, if it's $4.88 billion now, in 5 years it's $5.88 billion. That's the obligations we have now. Our revenue growth per year, if you just go on our trend line for the past couple decades, including our best years, so in other words, it pulls the trend line up, including our best years is about $150 million a year. So if you go out 5 years, it's not complicated math to know you got $750 million of growth, but we got nearly $1 billion in obligations already on the books, and that's if we never passed another law that spent another dollar in that time. So that's the hesitancy that the Senate has had on going to a 50% income tax cut. So we had to go through and see, okay, how much of the $1 billion is set in stone? And that's really what, how much of it's hard and how much of it's soft. And so that's what we had to go through. So if you were to go in and do an income tax that moved people to West Virginia, it has to be at least a 50% reduction in it. There's only been one state ever in the Union that has ever eliminated its income tax, and that's Alaska. And they did it on their oil severance tax and a smoothing mechanism. The other 8 states that don't have an income tax never had one. They have never had an income tax. So it's not something the state did to affect that. It was constitutionally. So it's not a small task. Now, there's been state after state after state, as the Tax Foundation will attest to, that has come out and said, we're going to eliminate our income tax. And the reason that it requires at least a 50% reduction to move people is you cannot be taken seriously unless you hit that 50% mark, because so many states have done it. So you don't move people unless you hit the 50% mark and have a mechanism for knocking the rest of it out. And even then, it takes about a 5-year lag once you do that moves feet. So to get there, for West Virginia, to get to that point, it's a $2.6 billion lift to eliminate your income tax. To eliminate our personal property taxation, it's a $600 million lift. It's actually $580-some million. So, and we're about average with our income tax in the country, but our personal property tax, we're the worst in the nation. So if you go after, you got a problem that is attainable to solve with the personal property tax, and just to your point, to knock out 100% of the personal income tax, to be that 10th state in the country that has no income tax, and the only second one ever in the history of the country to eliminate it, is insurmountable at this point with the revenues that we have coming into the state and the state's obligations.
That's an excellent response, Senator Tarr. Eric, you talk about the severance tax, and President Blair was on a couple weeks ago, and we got into this $1 billion of severance tax that we're not counting. And I want to be clear, those triggers are only they're not based on the severance taxes, right? They're based on the other taxes.
That was one of the compromises, that we had through this process, is on the mechanism by which we trigger down the income tax. And the Senate's position was that those triggers could not be related to our severance tax collections, because that is such a volatile revenue source. So, we had, I just got the numbers in for February here just this morning, and so we're about 288% above estimates for our severance tax collections. That could just as easily in the next year go to 288% below. And so to base a very steady stream of revenue to the state on reduction on that, on such a volatile revenue source, it wasn't safe enough for the Senate's position.
So what will that money be used for? I think that's what the last question to the puzzle for the viewers is, what do we do with this $1 billion surplus? If we're not going to rebate it back to the taxpayers, what do we do with the $1 billion?
It's an excellent question. So the simple answer is you take one-time peaks in your revenue and you apply it to one-time fixes your state needs. So, for instance, deferred maintenance. They're not really sexy things to do, but they're things that reduce the cost to the state going forward, which means it reduces the demand on a taxpayer. Or you apply it to things that improve the revenue situation of the state through economic development for having had spent that money that one time. So what and I think you're seeing this in the House as well, but it's also the Senate's position, is that when we've got these really big surpluses, we look at problems that we've had that have been decades old that we have not been able to solve. Deferred maintenance is one of those. Our jails are falling in on themselves. Some jails have padlocks on the doors. We've got federal lawsuits because of the lack of safety in our prisons. It's a $200 million nut to crack. So when you go in to do that, we've not been touching it. I think the governor's request this year was it was either $2 or $20 million, but it was a fraction, and that's big relative to past years for deferred maintenance and corrections. So we can go in and take care of all that deferred maintenance. Higher education is critical to the economic development of our state. Yet they have $354 million in deferred maintenance, where you got some buildings that you got leaky roofs coming in, running the floor, and things like that produce more and more expense if you don't take care of it. It's decades old. We can take care of all that. So you go in and you start taking care of those things that are only going to cost us more if we don't take care of them now. That's one of the things you do with it. The second thing is you do what we've been doing to bring the new cores in. So when you come in and have an infrastructure issue that is preventing West Virginia from being considered for placement of a large employer, or even small employers for that matter, or even housing development, sewer, water, and broadband, those type of things, roads. So you start looking, okay, how do we fix our infrastructure so that we're competitive when they're going through site location considerations? So, and that's what with the new core thing. New core was a $315 million contribution to that, in addition to the pilot programs they put forward, which was about $1 billion pilot program. That $315 million went to was roads, sewer, water, broadband to the site where they were going to locate. which is also, by the way, acres and acres and acres of other sites where we can put other companies now that it has that infrastructure. That's one-time spend. So you use those revenues that either increase jobs in the state or they decrease demand on the taxpayer.
Excellent response again. Do you think would you be in favor of trying to eliminate more of the machinery and inventory tax before the income tax, or do you think they go hand in hand, or have you looked that far ahead?
Yeah, my preference was to go after the entire personal property tax situation that we have, and we've not been able to do that in this bill. To give you an idea, the personal property taxation piece of this bill is about $38 million worth. In the equipment and inventory piece, in the vehicles, it's about 130 to 140 million. So, but if you go after the full boat on the equipment and inventory piece, and like I said, it's going to be closer to 580 to 600 million dollars. The reason I would go after that first is one is it's a lower branch on the tree to be able to grab, and second is that and third, second's worst in the country in how we tax it. Third is we have an opportunity to be one of the best, because most states either tax equipment or tax inventory. Only I think it's 8 states neither tax neither one of those. So we could be the 9th state in the country that has no tax on equipment and inventory at a cost of about $600 million, which drives our competitiveness with other states to driving those jobs here through the roof. And it only took $600 million to do it. And so the debate becomes is which is more important to do? Eliminate the personal income tax, which moves people, because that's where you move population, and with population comes the dollars associated with those lives. And then so that one, to get there, to just start to be taken serious, is $1.3 billion. To actually do it is $2.6 billion. So it's to me it's a lower hanging branch. So I think that both have merit. We have to stay at least average or better than average with our income tax situation. And there's a lot of states looking how to drive down their income tax. So right now, to stay competitive, I think it makes sense to bring income tax down. But if it does not have economic impact, you've diminished your ability to take away the penalty on capital investment in your state. And so, which is eliminating the personal property tax takes away that penalty for capital investment.
Again, tremendous insight, and I know we've dwelled on this a good bit. Let's segue a little bit in your final minutes here with us to the PEIA situation. I know there's been some movement there to try to stabilize PEIA so it isn't a huge drain on the coffers. Tell us what's going on with that.
Yeah, so there was the tax cut there's kind of a three-legged stool. You'll hear, I think a lot of us explain this as a three-legged stool. In order to make all this work, we needed the tax cut, we needed a pay raise, and we needed PIA fixed. So we were talking about those expenditures. One of those expenditures going out between now and 2027 was PIA. PIA is in itself, between now and 2027, has $1 billion obligated to it between then in an aggregate. So the reason it's getting in that situation is the revenues off of the premiums are way less than the expenses associated with providing the health care to PIA recipients. And the way the state's been handling that is we've been backfilling a reserve fund. So we've been covering the loss with general revenue. The problem with doing that is you're not driving it through payroll. And since we're not doing it through administration of payroll, we are giving the federal government all the money to them to administer their part of PIA because they have a large administrative part. If it goes through payroll, the feds pay for their administrative piece of it. So we had 32% of a lot of our funds that we couldn't draw down from the feds because we were backfilling a loss rather than going through payroll with it. So in order to get the tax cut up, we had to reduce the outstanding liability on PIA. So that's one thing. Second is that the network for PIA was falling apart. So we had some providers that were very public that came out and said we are no longer taking PIA as of July of 2023. We had other providers coming to us and saying, if you don't get this fixed, we're jumping on that bandwagon fast. So then we would still be providing a health insurance to the state employees, but they would have nowhere to use it. So that problem it's in front of our nose right now. It's not a problem in the future. It is right now. It has to be fixed today, or that was getting ready to happen to the state of West Virginia. So then, in order to fix that, that requires a premium increase. There's no way to get around it. It requires a premium increase that has not been increased for 12 years. For 12 years, think of any private insurance. If you have health insurance, you're not a public employee there, and you're listening to this, how many times has your health insurance went up? On PIA, it's not been increased for 12 years. So more than $1 or $2 in a premium. So what was happening is the state share was going up and up and up, and the employee share was going down, 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 and then the expenses were not we couldn't meet those expenses with the premiums coming in from either the state or the employees. So we needed to make sure that we did not harm public employees in fixing that situation. And the way you get there is you go in for a pay raise that is different from what we've done in the past. In the past, we would do an average across the board of what we take all the employees and we pick an average, and that average is where it goes. Instead of doing that, we went in and said we're going to give a flat across the board $2,300 pay raise. And then in that pay raise piece, no public employee, regardless of their income level, has a premium increase that exceeds their pay raise. The ones where it's less have the biggest tax cut. So hence the three-legged stool I'm talking about. So everybody comes out ahead significantly with this, and then it also, into the future, reduces our liability to PIA for drawing down those federal funds by $152 million a year. So it's $120 million a year. It's $120 million a year. I was thinking of another one that we were able to reduce. That allows us to reduce that delta that we had going the out years for the tax cut to get it from that 600 up closer to that 750, 760. That's just one of the components.
Well, I'll tell you what, Senator Tarr, you've provided us with some tremendous insight. We appreciate your openness, your transparency with us. We know you have to get to some senatorial business here. So any last closing comments from you?
No, just thanks for having me on the show. I think the more that we get to tell our story about what's happening up here, the legislature is going to look back on this and it's going to be a time we were really proud to serve people of West Virginia with what comes out of this whole deal with this three-legged stool we're talking about. So.
Well, I agree that you have provided some great insight there, and it will help people understand. For Legislature This Week, we'll be right back after this important message. Thank you.
Here's the better opportunity you're looking for. Enhancing health and wellness of our community, one patient at a time. Apply today at monhealth.com/careers. Choose Mon Health. Feel the difference.
Welcome to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SEBA WV and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. We are proud to welcome back to the show Governor Jim Justice. Governor, thanks for joining us.
John, thank you for having me. Appreciate you being with you and Charles, Andy, all of you.
Well, we appreciate you, sir. Also with us, Governmental Affairs reporter Charles Young. Charles, you've got some questions for the governor.
Yes, sir. Good morning. So I know you just wrapped up the bill signing ceremony for SB 10. I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. You know, this is a bill that has been repeatedly tried every legislative session going back to 2017. We had a public hearing earlier this year where we had a bunch of folks speak out against it. We had, the presidents of just about every university in the state speak out against it. Tell me a little bit about, why you decided to sign this bill and, why we weren't listening to all of that opposition.
Well, Charles, a lot of folks had been pushing for this bill a long time, and it couldn't quite get across the finish line. I told them very passionately that if we got it across the finish line, that absolutely I would proudly sign it. We had some reasonable exemptions for safety in there that we want. That's the bottom line. We just want to be safe. We want our kids attending our universities and our colleges and everything to have a great experience, and God forbid we don't want any terrible incident whatsoever in any way. But at the end of the day, the law-abiding, the folks that have permits and everything, they're not the people that I worry about at all. The people that you worry about are those people that are really troubled and really having a tough way to go and everything. We need to amp up our mental health services without any question. We need to amp up knowledge and training, and absolutely without any question. But from the standpoint of carrying a concealed weapon, you have to have some level of training. And I truly believe that the innocent and those that are in these situations, if you believe that people can't carry guns on campuses and in buildings and everything, you're living in a cave, because absolutely we can't stop it. We cannot stop it. And so it's happening all over this country and everything, bad situations. So in this situation, just maybe people will be less apt to absolutely bring weapons to a campus in a state that joins 11 other states and everything. And I don't know if we're the 11th or there's 11 others, but I think it is surely a deterrent to roll into a campus and everything where you know that there's folks that could be walking around with a concealed weapon and have their permit and everything and have been trained and know how to use that weapon and everything, versus going into soft targets where nobody has a weapon and literally nobody can stop the carnage that can happen and has happened over and over in this country.
Governor, I'd like to follow up on that question a little bit, because your response triggered an idea here. So does that mean that you would support, or you think there should be similar legislation in regards to concealed carry, like among public school teachers or in lower level grades, high schools, elementary schools, that type of thing? Is that something you think we could be seeing in legislatures to come?
Well, John, first of all, you've got to be of a certain age naturally to carry a weapon and everything, and to get a concealed weapon permit, and so. But with all that being said, I grew up around guns, and I'm perfectly comfortable around guns, and I never have ever known of an incident around anything where I was close to it where there was a gun accident, because literally people that are comfortable around guns know how to act safely around guns. Now, from the standpoint of future legislation, well, I can't predict the future, and I don't really need to or want to get into that. But from the standpoint of our teachers in schools and everything having access and the ability to carry a weapon and everything, I would be in support, because this day and time, especially with all the pressures that come upon young people, and it's just ridiculous what goes on within social media and everything today. But we've pushed our freedoms beyond limits of reasonableness, in my opinion. But with all that being said, I am very supportive of the Second Amendment, and I am very proud of what we passed here today, or we signed today.
Well, you also recently signed the bill in regards to the Form Energy development up in the Northern Panhandle, up in Weirton. That was surprisingly, I think, on my part, I was surprised by the amount of opposition that it ran into. Did that surprise you, and does that worry you as far as trying to craft future deals to bring more businesses here?
Well, it's surely not. It's not a deterrent from my side. In this arena of a session here, you can always get situations where people are very vocal of their opinion and everything, and you've just got to go through the process and everything. I think the vote was still, on the House side, still almost a 75% vote, and surely a decent vote on the Senate side as well. But let me just say this, John. Think about Form Energy. Just think about this for a second. We are going to retain basically the collateral value, from the standpoint of the land and the buildings, until they absolutely perform at a level of 750 or greater jobs. Can you imagine what that's going to do to the town of Weirton? Can you imagine what that's going to do all across this state? And the satellites that will come in addition to this primary anchor tenant will be unbelievable. You know, absolutely, it's hard to argue, you know, whether it be Form or Nucor or Pure Watercraft or Berkshire Hathaway or the Omnius, you know, that's coming to the southern part of the state, absolutely with rare earth elements, you know, and so and the chances of that expanding are unbelievable if everything starts to really work. So sure, you know, we literally as a state have begun to be able to do something that we've not done in West Virginia maybe ever. And that's really being able to compete with other states for real live businesses coming and real live job opportunities. And that's so that's what I am really proud of that, and proud of all the folks that helped make that happen, and along with my people in our office, myself, and many, many, many others. So I think it's a great day that happened in the northern part of our state, and it's just going to continue. And that's no deterrent to me whatsoever to not continue to craft packages to recruit businesses to West Virginia.
Well, that is certainly good to hear, because I mean, from our perspective, and we editorialized in favor of Form Energy, Nucor, those packages that you and Mitch Carmichael and others were involved in crafting definitely did enough to protect the state's investment and, you know, requiring the companies to invest and to hire people before the state money kicks in. So again, you know, congratulations on that. Did want to talk to you a little bit, Governor, about the tax plan that's making its way through. The Senate's passed it, the House still has to concur, and then you'll need to sign it. You know, obviously, you went with the 50% recommendation over 3 years, 30% in the first year. That's again something that we supported. We saw the value in it. The Senate deal has cut that to 21.25%. Less than half of the 50% reduction outlined in your original plan. Is there any disappointment whatsoever on your part that it isn't a little bit bigger? And do you think we'll ever get to the point where we can say, hey, there's no income tax in West Virginia?
John, there is not a thread of disappointment from my side, you know, and just think about the whole deal. You know, really, when it really shakes out and everything, what did we do? You know, in the beginning days, you know, I came up with the idea of rebating your car tax back and not taking the income away from our counties that would absolutely retain local control and need those dollars, really, really need those dollars, but rebate those dollars back. Well, we got that. And at the end of the day, on top of that, we got a 21.25% reduction in the income tax. Now, we got to be really fair here. The House still needs to do their job. The House stepped up on day one, you know, for my 30-10-10 plan and said, we're all in. You know, the House has been a leader in many, many, many ways, and they need to complete their job and have ample time to do so. And we're going to be super respectful of that. But hopefully, if it comes out the way it is right here today, we got 21.25. Now, we didn't get 30, but we got 21.25. And we got triggers that are right behind that will allow us to trigger up to 10%, not 2 times, but continue to do that until the total elimination of the state income tax. So, John, we got something great for the small businesses. I love that teetotally to death from the standpoint of being able to reduce their machinery and inventory tax for the small businesses. There are 71,000 accounts. You know, now that doesn't mean there's 71,000 businesses, but there's 71,000 small business accounts. And so it will affect lots and lots and lots and lots of folks and everything. And the cost of that was $35 million, not hundreds and hundreds of millions, to where people like myself or the great big giant companies, the Walmarts or Dow Chemicals or whatever, they're not the beneficiaries of that. It's the small businesses. So, and the cost is $35 million, not much money. And with all that right behind that, we got something for the disabled vets and everything. And my feelings wholeheartedly on that. I'm very supportive. And so I salute the Senate and the House for a lot of great work. I have sat with both of them, and we've gone round and round and round and over and over and over on this. It was a great negotiation when it finally got to where we quit, throwing mud at one another and all that kind of stuff, and we just got right down to the nitty-gritty, but nobody on the planet could be happier than me because it's really, really close to what I wanted to go, where I wanted to go in the first place, plus the fact that there's some great ideas that came, from the standpoint of helping the small businesses, helping the vets. It's good stuff, good stuff.
Well, Governor, I appreciate the fact that you early on, when your proposal was put out there, you said, hey, I'm here to negotiate. I'm not saying I have all the answers. You clearly have lived up to that and have gotten it. To go back to the 10% cut, though, we did the math real quick, and it's, so it's going to take almost 8 years of sustained growth for us to be able to eliminate the income tax, and I think back to Grover Norquist and Steve Moore's visit and Steve Moore going, hey, go big or go home. Do you think the state will ever get to that total elimination of the income tax?
Well, I do, John, and it doesn't take 8 years. Just think about this. Let's say this coming fall, let's say late summer, we're just percolating along and doing really good. There's nothing that prohibits, and we've had this discussion, with President Blair and with Speaker Hanshaw. We've had this discussion point blank. What prohibits us from calling a special session and taking another 10% or another 15%, whack it, bite at the apple at that point in time? Nobody's going to criticize us for getting their taxes cut. And so I guess the right thing would be to say, am I a believer wholeheartedly that it's going to take 8 years? Well, I'm hopeful that it's not, but John, even if it did, we have not cut a tax in West Virginia since 1987. Come on. If it takes 8 years, so what? And we'll awaken to a day that absolutely will be, that we will remember this day forevermore. We've taken a big, bold step and everything. And as long as this economy percolates and everything, maybe we can do significantly more before I leave and go out the door.
Well, excellent, Governor. I know Charles has a question about PEIA.
Yes, sir. So the PEI change bill is, it's already passed the Senate. It's currently in front of the House. Earlier, we spoke to Senator Eric Tarr, and he talked about the PEIA bill as, kind of one of the three components of this legislative session that all kind of have to balance out. He mentioned the pay raise bill, the tax cut bill, and the PEIA fix bill. Do you see the PEIA bill as, that third important component? Do you plan to sign it, given that it includes premium increases, something, you've been very against in the past?
Well, Charles, let me explain this from my standpoint. We have said, and we've had task force, we've had all kinds of different, meetings and everything in regard to trying to find a permanent solution for PEIA. All of us want a permanent solution. The problem is a revenue source that whether it be, we're going down the path that, a lot of educators wanted a increase in the severance tax on gas and let that be the revenue source. Well, we couldn't get to first base on that. And so then, and I wasn't an advocate, but that just fell flat on its face. And we've had several other suggestions and everything. This suggestion is just this. There are folks that are out there that are probably not in favor of a pay raise in addition to an income tax cut. But now we have a situation to where between the Senate and the House and a little bit me, but we've come to a vehicle that absolutely we feel like is going to staunch up PEIA going forward and give it basically the backbone that it needed to be able to be sustained. And the backbone came in just this. We're going to do a pay raise, of which some folks didn't want to do. You know, I said that's what I wanted to do in the state of the state and everything, but we're going to use the pay raise as the vehicle to absolutely establish the backbone of PEIA. It's not perfect. It's not perfect at all. But literally it gives a $2,300 pay raise that basically covers most everyone, but in that, the people that really wouldn't have qualified at the highest level with a 5% across the board, wouldn't have qualified at the highest level. Now, those people with their income will be able to cover the PEIA and still end up with a substantial pay raise. So it's not perfect. It's not perfect at all, but it does accomplish what I've tried to say in the past, and that is your PEIA is not going to cost you or go up and cost you additional dollars while on my watch. And I've tried with all in me to just maintain just that. This is not perfect and everything, but at the end of the day, it's at least it gives us a mechanism. And I salute Tom Caputo and everything. He was pretty much the author of this, but all of our the different finance chairs, where it be Vernon Chris or it be Eric Tarr and everything, they've done good work as well here. There's lots and lots of folks here that are really doing a good job, and so everybody's working together, and let's try to get all this stuff across the finish line. It'd be a monumental accomplishment in this session.
Yes, sir. Well, and the last time that we had you on the live stream here at the beginning of February, you told us that you were getting closer to making a decision about 2024. You said you were going to be making that decision within 30 days. We're kind of coming up on that window. Are you any closer to making an official decision?
Charles, I am. We've probably got a little bit behind because, first and foremost, what we want to do is do the right thing for the state of West Virginia and the folks. In this session, there's a lot of work and a lot of great, big stuff that we were, moving forward and everything. And hopefully we're getting close to the finish line on all that and everything. And, from a standpoint of my feelings, my family's feelings, I won't disclose to you today, but I pretty well made up my mind what I'm going to do, and we sure want to have a little bit more discussions, but we're really close to being at the finish line on that. I'm not going to tease people and jerk people around and everything about stuff like that. I think we make a decision, we move on.
Governor, I'd like to ask two final questions, kind of as a wrap up, and you can take it in the direction you want it to go. But in terms of this session, if PEIA gets fixed, if the pay raises go through, if the tax cuts go through, Form Energy, there's some other bills going through. Do you think this will be one of the most historic legislative sessions in terms of success to move West Virginia forward?
Well, I surely hope so, John. Like I said, we still got work to do. We've got to give the House their due, and we've still got some work to do and everything. But just the stuff you've named, and and stuff that we may miss that are still right there. But it may seem small, but we're going to end up with maybe $10 million in an emergency fund to help the hungry. I mean, come on. With West Virginia doing what West Virginia is doing today, I mean, should we absolutely have hungry people in West Virginia? You know, just what we did right now in the campus carry thing, you know, and standing up for our Second Amendment in West Virginia. Should West Virginia, of all states, not be one of the states that's behind others, you know, in this legislation? So whether it be Form Energy or PEIA or the tax cuts or on and on and on, pay raises and everything else, yeah, this is going to be a big one. And so I salute all the hard work that lots and lots and lots of people have been doing, whether it be on the Senate and the House side, and especially, you know, on their two sides and everything. But the same thing, you know, in my office, you know, that the hardworking people in the governor's office, they've done really good. And so I couldn't be more proud. You know, at the end of the day, John, I have to say this real quick, but, you know, if we will be truthful to the people of West Virginia, and absolutely we will embrace the fact that, you know, that we can work together. We don't need to throw rocks at one another. For God's sakes, living, that's the last thing we need to do. You know, I mean, we're on the move in West Virginia, and the only thing that's going to absolutely stop this movement is us blow our own legs off by just being absolutely silly in what we do. So no, I'm really proud, really proud of where we're going.
Governor, I'd like to wrap up with this question. On Saturday, there's going to be a groundbreaking ceremony in Jackson County on the Berkshire Hathaway. You've got Form Energy, you've got Nucor. You're going to tell us what you're going to do in the future here on your own, but can you tease us any? Are there more big developments coming to West Virginia?
I can tease you a little bit and say on Saturday, we're going to announce, it won't be as big, but it's still significant and everything. We're going to announce another thing that's coming in West Virginia, and you'll hear it on Saturday. It's not as big, but remember this. I remember like it was yesterday when we celebrated anything that we could possibly have, and this was prior to my watch and everything. But I can remember, you know, a prior administration down at the Taco Bell in the town of Charleston celebrating a Taco Bell opening in West Virginia. So we've really changed the landscape from that, and got a lot of great announcements and everything, but you'll hear another one on Saturday.
Governor, thank you very much. Any other wrap up?
No, that's enough. I'm out of breath. That's enough. But John and Charles, thank you. Thank you, Andy, for all you do. I mean, you guys have been major contributors to this success. You really have. You know, how you report and what you say and what you do and everything carries a big stick, and the optimism across this entire state and the enthusiasm, and it's contagious. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. This is Legislature This Week, and we'll take a break.
Your heart is in the best hands. Mon Health Heart and Vascular is the highest ranked cardiovascular program in the state of West Virginia by the American College of Cardiology. Choose Mon Health. Feel the difference.
Welcome to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SIVA WV and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. We are joined right now by Randy Yohe of West Virginia Public Broadcasting. He's been down there at the Capitol day in and day out covering things. We also have Charles Young, our West Virginia News legislative reporter, here to talk about what's been going on. We've had some great guests, Randy. We've had Eric Tarr, we had Mike Caputo on to open the show, and we just finished up with Governor Justice. So lots to talk about. What are you hearing in the hallways down there?
Well, first of all, it's not just day in and day out anymore. It's day in and night out, because last night they went into session at 7:30, and so both Chris Schultz and I, Chris covered the Senate and I cover the House. We got to listen in case something happens that you don't expect. So and it's going to be like that for the rest of the session as we come down the home stretch, as they say at Churchill Downs. boy, you had Eric Tarr, and tonight on the legislature today, we have Senator Tarr and Delegate Chris, both heads of the finance committees, to really hash out this whole tax plan, which looks like it's still the word compromise I'm hearing. We heard it from Majority Leader Householder the other day, and I think that's what they're heading toward now. But the House, I talked to Marty Gearhart, the whip, the majority whip the other day, and he says, we don't rubber stamp anything. So once the tax discussion comes to the House, well, it's at the House now, but I think they're waiting until next week to really dive in and look at it. It probably will, go to committee today or tomorrow, and they'll scrutinize the heck out of it. I'm sure of that.
Do you think that gives them enough time, Randy? I mean, we're coming down to the wire.
It's the $64,000 question, isn't it, Charles? They say yes. I mean, we heard from Delegate Rohrbach last night talking about PEIA, and Chris asked him the same thing. Do you have enough time to get these major bills passed? And he said, yes, we got plenty of time. So that tells me that there is more compromise on the surface than we know about.
Well, could we stick on the PEIA bill for just a minute? That's something we've talked to all of the guests today about. And so, the range of opinion there has, kind of gone from Senator Caputo saying, this is another Band-Aid measure, this is yet another year kicking it down the road, to both, the governor and Senator Tarr saying they think this is, a one-time measure that speaks towards the long-term longevity of the program. What are you kind of hearing, Randy?
Well, they're talking about, and I heard Senator Plymel say this, that it's a three-legged position, that it all has to do with tax plan, PEIA, and the budget, and that's not even the third one. I can't think of it right now. And if that's it, pay raise, tax cut, and PEIA, and if one of those falters, then they all falter in a way, because that $2,300 raise that is proposed for state workers is meant to compensate what premium hikes may happen if the whole PIA system goes through. So each one depends on the other, which also tells me that there's a lot of compromise still going on amongst House, Senate, and even the executive branch on trying to get these done. But yeah, like you said, we got 8-9 days to do it.
Well, I find it interesting, and Senator Tarr brought this up, was, I think they're really trying to hear all sides and balance things out. They have not had a rate increase for PEIA in 12 years. And he said, name one other entity that hasn't had insurance go up in the past 12 years. He said, you talk about your private companies and your employees that are tax-paying citizens of West Virginia, and they're having to pay more for insurance, so it's only natural that there's some assumption of responsibility there. Now, Senator Caputo, who opened our show today, was talking about, state workers took the better benefits and that type of thing in lieu of pay increases. Well, now that we've seen 4 years of 5% pay increases, and a large number, I don't have the data in front of me, but I would say a large number of state employees are now making above the median income for West Virginia. It's a give and take.
It's gotten up to that. I think there's a couple things they have to realize, is that PEIA insurance is better across the board for the people that are making the amount of money that you're talking about than a whole lot of private insurances. There's no doubt about that. But you also have to figure that if they want to eliminate the family plan and eliminate your spouse from being able to get on your policy, if they already have a separate job, that throws another monkey wrench into the works that compensates for that money that you're getting in, they say. But I don't think that's really close when you're talking about spousal and family coverage. So that's a big caveat, and I believe that House will talk a lot about that.
Well, and the other element that Senator Tarr pointed out, that, there is that give and take between the PEIA and the pay raise bill, but then all of those folks would then benefit from the tax cut. That's how he was trying to loop it all in. So again, it depends on your perspective, and it's kind of a net neutral kind of argument, I guess.
Plus, the other side of it is this reimbursement to the hospitals. I mean, what did he say about that? That that has been a given for that $40 million that they pumped in right away after, and we've talked about this before, after Wheeling Central said, hey, as of July 1st, we're going to cut them off, and everybody else would jump in. So I got to find out where that stands as well, because it's not just about individual state employees that are going to have a differentiation in their insurance coverage, but making sure that these hospitals now get this, 110% rather than 59% of what Medicaid was paying in before.
Yeah, it sounds like that is driving this move, and then the move is intended to dissuade, other healthcare systems from joining, the group that's already said that. So.
Yeah, Senator Tarr did an excellent job explaining PIT and the PEIA situation, and he's very direct, and I give him credit for that. And yeah, he made it very simple. He said, if we don't do something to address the healthcare facilities and their concerns, then we may have the greatest state insurance around, but nobody's going to accept it. And, that's the reality of it. And, we all know healthcare is one of those almost guarantees. They used to say that paying taxes was a guarantee. Healthcare increase cost seems to have become a guarantee of life. Randy, anything else going on that you should make us aware of?
There's a couple of things I think that are interesting. Yesterday, kind of under the radar a little bit, this deliberate intent bill passed. And for people that don't quite understand, this is when there's a company that has deliberately not followed the rules and there's an injury on the job. They used a Big Branch mine for Big Branch coal mine disaster back in 2010, for example. There were 29 died, and they knew that these roofs were faulty and such. And what Senator John Paul Hott wanted to do was limit the non-economic compensation at $250,000. Well, people had come up and testified in a public hearing that if you lost your legs or you lost your life, and your family still had to survive, and it was that $250,000 was a drop in the bucket. Well, that raised to $500,000 after some committee wrangling. And then it got in a debate yesterday, and it passed. And so that is now law. No, they went over to the Senate, I'm sorry. And but that deliberate intent, there was an awful lot of people that came to talk about the challenges. And then there's the coal companies, the forestry companies that say that, we can't get the insurance that we need because of these caveats. So there's both sides of that issue I thought was interesting. And then there's also this Religious Freedom Protection Act that passed yesterday. And there's the big concern from the LGBTQ and other minority members that places like Huntington and Wheeling that have passed minority laws, that this law would probably get them to supersede, that maybe a landlord might not want to rent to a gay person because of their religious beliefs, or making cookies or cakes. I mean, it comes down to minutia, where one side says, no, this is a safeguard for people that want their religious freedom and not government intervention, and the other people that are worried that this is just a bill that will discriminate.
Well, Charles and I were talking about that before we went on the air today. And I mean, the U.S. Constitution and the U.S. Supreme Court has weighed in on a number of these factors. It just seems like these local bills and these state bills are just like instituted as lines of interference that, if you want to challenge it, it's just another court hearing. It's more legal costs. It's like we put into these rules sometimes just to keep people from challenging ultimately what's already covered in the U.S. Constitution. I mean, what's your thoughts there?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, supposedly this is, the Delegate Jonathan Pinson, who put forth the bill, said that this has been in federal code for quite a while, that 31 states already have this, and it hasn't been used in that problematic way, that it's just there, as you say, to have a judicial avenue to take, a legal avenue to take. Not that there's any final decisions, and he says a lot of those decisions have been denied. No, that doesn't count with the religious freedom. So it's interesting that, yeah, you're right, that local and state law is springboarding off what federal law already seems to exist.
Well, I know another interesting development yesterday, and I think you have the story. I have your web story here. Locality pay bill fails in House.
Interesting. I listened to that whole debate. Yeah, and we've been hearing for so long, especially in the Eastern Panhandle, with the growth over there and Pennsylvania and Maryland and Virginia right on the borders, that so many people were going across. West Virginians that wanted to work in West Virginia were going across the border because they could get so much more pay and benefits. Well, so the locality bill comes up, and all this would have done was set up a commission, a cost of living commission, to study the circumstances and pick 5 counties out that were in need, and I think 4 out of the 5 were Eastern Panhandle counties, and then just report back to the legislature and say, hey, here's what we found, and there's a fund mechanism set up, but no funding was involved in putting any money into this. And you heard from a lot of these delegates from the coal fields that said, hey, wait a minute, we're tired of getting the short end of the stick all the time, and that we're not going to vote for this because it's preferential. You guys already have all the money up there in the Eastern Panhandle. And the debate went on for a good hour and a half. I mean, we heard from representatives like Delegate Riddenhauer from, I believe, Jefferson County, that said, I've talked to 7,000 people that say they want to stay working in West Virginia, but they can make $20,000 more going over there to Maryland. And then we heard from a Delegate Vance down in Wyoming County that said, we're a team and we're 55 counties. You're picking 5 counties out of that. What about us? What about Boone and Mingo and Wyoming and McDowell? We get the short end of the stick every time. So it failed. I think there was 52 to 46.
Very interesting. Charles, any last thoughts?
No, I was going to say it's crossover day today, isn't it, Randy?
Yes, it is.
So is there anything you're particularly paying attention to today during the floor sessions?
I spent the morning at Governor Justice's SB 10 conference, right. So I got to skedaddle back and find out everybody else is kind of picking up the slack right now, and we have a great team. And as I said, tonight on the legislature today, we'll hear from both Chris and Tarr, which should be interesting, the 2 Finance Committee chairs that will further the discussion that you guys have already started today.
And it just crossed my mind, Randy, are you guys doing the final day coverage like you've done in the past, the last few hours?
Yes, we'll do final hours. Yes, we'll go from 8 to midnight. I'll host that. And as I've been hosting the show this week because Bob Brunner's off this week and enjoying it. It's nice to get there in front of the camera. A little more work, but yes, we'll do final hours for sure. That'll run from 8 to midnight on the 11th on that final day.
Well, again, our broadcast partner, West Virginia Public Broadcasting, Randy Yohe, thanks for joining us. Charles, as always, it's been a pleasure. And this is Legislature This Week. We'll be back next Wednesday for our final wrap-up show from the legislature. And again, Legislature Today, West Virginia Public Broadcasting, great show tonight at 6. And then don't forget the final day of the legislature where it seems like that tax cut could be going down to those final hours. We may all be tuned in that Saturday. Let's have a good week, guys. Let's move West Virginia forward.
Your heart is in the best hands. Mon Health Heart and Vascular is the highest ranked cardiovascular program in the state of West Virginia by the American College of Cardiology. Choose Mon Health. Feel the difference.